I am injured. So I'm just going to sit here and study with y'all. Let's see. Don't know what I'm supposed to do. All right, so we're going to open this.
Welcome back to Women 200 Introduction to Gender Studies. I'm your instructor, Deepa, with the first lecture in Module 4.
There we
Our
go.
theme in this module is men and masculinities, and we'll focus on the
Oh,
gendered experiences
sorry.
of boys and men, considering why masculinity is such a powerful force and how the concept of intersectionality allows us to see multiple masculinities shaped by race, class, sexuality, and gender. In this lecture, I'll address the questions: what is masculinity and how is it connected to patriarchy? The gender binary pits masculinity and femininity as opposite or contrasting ways of being. In other words, within the gender binary, a person can be either masculine or feminine, either male or female, either man or woman. There is no room for people who embody both masculine and feminine attributes, or for people who don't fully conform to one of the two gender options. While the gender binary is the dominant or hegemonic lens through which most societies around the world, including US society, understand gender, our views of gender are continually changing. As we listen more to people's lived experiences and learn more from science, history, and other cultures, we see that gender appears more fluid than fixed. The third wave of feminism, which took off in 1990, began to popularize an alternative to the gender binary: the idea that gender is a spectrum. The gender spectrum refers to the idea that there are many gender identities and expressions beyond male and female, man and woman.
Yep, what have I been saying forever? This exact thing. And people don't like to hear it. It's like they skipped biology class or that day of biology class where they talked about intersex people and chromosomes and hormones.
Transgender people, queer or genderqueer people, intersex people, two spirit people, and non binary or gender non-conforming people are all included as part of the gender spectrum. Whether we think about gender in terms of a binary or a spectrum, masculinity and femininity emerge as organizing forces, shaping how we understand, embody, and enact gender, and ultimately ourselves. Masculinity refers to the qualities, behaviors, and roles associated with boys and men. Femininity refers to the qualities, behaviors, and roles associated with girls and women. Both masculinity and femininity are socially constructed, which means that social and cultural expectations and norms mold the qualities, behaviors, and roles we associate with men and women. Although genitalia, gonads, hormones, and chromosomes shape how we understand masculinity and femininity, bodies and their biology are interpreted by societies through culture. This interpretation is how society constructs gender. Cultures around the world differ in the meanings and roles they attribute to masculinity and femininity. The American anthropologist Margaret Mead conducted research in Papua New Guinea in the 1930s to better understand how gender is socially constructed. Mead found different patterns of masculinity and femininity in the three oceanic cultures she studied. These patterns differed from how masculinity and femininity were defined in US culture. Among the Arapash people and the Biwat people, Mead found fewer pronounced gender roles and more common traits that were adopted by both men and women. The
Yeah.
Shambri people, on the other hand, had
Nice.
distinct expectations for men and women. Femininity was associated with being dominant, impersonal, and managerial, while masculinity was associated with being less responsible.
I forgot which cultures have a matriarchy. Let me see. Mm, looks like a place in China, Costa Rica. There's a tribe in Costa Rica. Oh, there's a bunch. Yeah, there's a bunch that have matriarchal societies. That's cool. Yep.
And more emotionally dependent. In Chambri culture, men were more likely to focus on their appearances and spend time decorating themselves, while women perform more practical tasks. Mead was struck by the stark contrast between the Chambri interpretation of masculinity and femininity and the interpretation in Western societies, where women were encouraged to focus on their appearances while men performed more practical tasks. Over the years, Mead's studies have garnered criticism, targeting both her research methods as well as her conclusions. Still, many scholars regard her as a leading anthropologist of her time who helped illuminate the role that culture plays in shaping gender. There's no universal masculinity and no universal femininity. Both masculinity and femininity are specific to a time and place and change as cultures change. Our contemporary definitions of masculinity and femininity are rooted in patriarchy, which stratifies society along gender lines and assigns power and privilege to men and relegates women to a subordinate status. While patriarchy exists across the world today, this wasn't always the case. Anthropological, archaeological, and evolutionary psychological evidence reveals that most prehistoric hunter gatherer societies were relatively egalitarian. While these societies may have recognized gender differences, they didn't assign social rank and status according to gender. Gender differences didn't lead to gender inequality. Social scientists and historians trace the development and spread of patriarchy to social and technological developments like agriculture and animal domestication at the end of the Pleistocene era, about 11,000 years ago. As patriarchy evolved over thousands of years, it amplified gender differences, roles, and expectations. Moreover, it elevated the qualities and attributes associated with masculinity. On this slide, you can see some of the traits commonly associated with masculinity and femininity in the United States and Western culture more broadly. US culture identifies masculinity with toughness, protection, aggression, competition, and domination. On the other hand, it identifies femininity with what masculinity is not, with beauty, vulnerability, care, cooperation, and subordination. As you work through the material in this module, consider how you've been shaped by our society's norms around masculinity and femininity. Have you ever felt pressure to appear more masculine or feminine by embodying specific traits? How is this dividing up of
Yes, yes,
human
I have.
qualities between masculinity and femininity limiting? Can you think of ways it might be helpful? That's it for the first lecture in Module 3, Men and Masculinities. Thanks for your attention. There is one more lecture in this module.
Yes, I have been told many a time what I should and shouldn't look like, dress like, be like at every stage of my life. Having a thrown out neck. It's not fun when you have motor tics in your neck and head. It's quite the opposite of fun. Yeah, so I was the, quote unquote tomboy growing up. Excuse me. Hated dresses, typical girly like things. And I fought quite a lot with my grandmother on those things. And now being out as non-binary, people tell me that they can't take me seriously because I'm not androgynous enough. I look too feminine.
Welcome back to Masculinity. One of the ways our society maintains both patriarchy and the gender binary is through gender policing. Gender policing refers to the enforcement of normative gender expressions
Yep.
on an individual who's perceived as not sufficiently performing through appearance or
Hi,
behavior the
Peter.
sex that was assigned to.
Hi, Peter. My birthday was great, but now I'm in pain. I didn't really do anything too extravagant to make myself in pain. It's just what has happened to my body. Oh, hi, Tampa Bay man. Oh, cool. Um, what are the pronouns of your your child? Mine are they them, so I don't like any gendered terms. I tend to lean more towards masculine terms if people are going to give me any terms. Not entirely sure why I have that preference. Um, but usually, like, my preference is definitely they, them. Nice. So if your child is they, them, I wouldn't call them your daughter. I tell my grandmother to call me her little one, her baby, her grandbaby. Um, uh, unless like your uh, child is your spawn. Call them your spawn. Like I would sit down and actually just ask them. Ask them what terms they like and don't like. It is okay to ask those questions. Um, Sometimes I'm okay with, if someone is like, "Hey girl, hey," you know, um, in some of my gay circles, the very feminine boys call everybody girl or like sister or hey sis. I don't know. Some people, um, yeah, don't mind whatever. Like my best friend is non-binary and they literally don't care what you call them. He, him, she, her, they, it, swamp witch. Swamp witch. Yeah. Um, and sometimes there isn't really good neutral terms. And that's the kind of the fun of language. You just play around with things and um, you know, come up with like cute little names. I like coming up with names. Niece and nephew, nibbling. Nibbling like sibling, but with an N. That is adorable. But yeah, I wouldn't be afraid to like ask what they truly like are comfortable with in terms of terms. And sometimes with my grandmother, I just breeze by if she calls me her little girl. She forgets a lot. I forget my own pronouns. Like I misgender myself. So how can I be hard or mad at anybody who gets them wrong for me if I get my own pronouns? Yeah. I have the poo brain myself, though I've taken to if I talk about myself in the past, I'll use she, her, um, but like present, I just use, what I am comfortable with.
Them at birth. In the Beyond the Binary module, I talked about how the International Olympic Committee and other elite sports authorities policed the gender of South African runner Caster Semenya,
This is crazy.
scrutinizing her appearance and barring her from participating in women's races unless she altered her hormone levels to meet their ideal of femininity. In general, our society rewards men who exhibit masculine traits and women who exhibit feminine traits. Men who exhibit traits coded feminine and women who exhibit traits coded masculine are subject to scrutiny and punishment. Since the 19th century, the feminist movement has helped to challenge gender norms in our society. Feminism has given some women and girls more options, allowing them to embody traits across the gender spectrum. A 2018 national survey of more than 1,010 to 19-year-olds in the US found that while young women felt valued primarily for their appearance, they also believed there were many ways to be a girl. Girls could excel in sports, math, music, and leadership. But the same 2018 survey found that boys and men remain trapped in a limited frame of gender norms and roles. The young men who participated in the survey described the path to successful masculinity as narrow and rigid. American writer and researcher Peggy Orenstein has written extensively on masculinity and femininity in US culture. The first text I've assigned in this module is part of an article Orenstein contributed to The Atlantic in 2020 called The Miseducation of the American Boy. The article is based on 2 years of interviews she conducted with over 100 American boys and young men, ages 16 to 21. In the article, Orenstein writes, nearly every guy I interviewed held relatively egalitarian views about
I'll
girls,
answer that
at
in a
least their
second.
role in the public sphere. They considered their female classmates to be smart and competent, entitled to their place on the athletic field and in school leadership, deserving of their admission to college and of professional opportunities. They all had female friends. Most had gay male friends as well. That was a huge shift from what you might have seen 50, 40, maybe even 20 years ago. Yet, when asked to describe the attributes of the ideal guy, those same boys appear to be harking back to 1955. Dominance, aggression, rugged good looks with an emphasis on height, sexual prowess, stoicism, athleticism, wealth, at least someday. Stoicism means enduring pain or hardship quietly, without showing emotion and without complaining.
Which isn't
Many of
fair.
the young
That's
men
not fair.
Ornstein interviewed recognized how harmful adhering to this rigid masculine ideal could be, both to themselves and others. They knew about toxic masculinity.
Okay, I'm gonna pause there for a second and answer you. So Tampa Bay Man, I don't really have a huge opinion on it because, you know, I don't know. There's, it's such a complicated um, subject matter, and there's been studies out, and many people have already talked about um, the way that hormones play into your muscle mass. And um, the trans women get more of a bad rap than trans men, like almost all the time. It's like trans men don't exist to a lot of people, especially the people that complain about trans people. They only focus on trans women because they are only focusing on the penis aspect of it. They're like, um, but there's not enough um, trans people in sports to even really, for anybody to really care that much, honestly. Like, the studies show that within a year of a trans female being on HRT, their muscle mass goes way down. And so if you at least, know how the course is going to work, you can continue to do grip strength tests because it really is all about grip strength. It's not about the hormones really racing in your body. And so if the trans female loses muscle mass, they're pretty much, and they have the same grip strength as females in their weight class. There's not much difference. The thing is with like a lot of right wingers, they don't won't even look at the studies or look at the facts. They really don't care about facts. And the intersex people get shut out of sports because of they can't help that the hormones that are naturally occurring in their bodies, and the woman that beat that girl in the Olympics, who people were saying, "Oh, she's a man." She's not a man. She's intersex. She has a specific condition. There's many different intersex conditions, and she is a female. Just bottom line. And also, a trans man competed in the Olympics. Nobody said anything about that. Um, yeah, Leah Thomas is one of the biggest ones. Isn't she MMA? Is that the one that's MMA or the bicyclist? Because I know that there's a bicyclist. I understand that, like, maybe your child doesn't want to talk about it with you because maybe they think they might get upset or upset you, or maybe they just don't have enough information. Hi, Carrie Ann. Maybe they just don't have enough information themselves. That's another thing. I wish, if people don't have a lot of information, you shouldn't be forming like solid opinions about things. Um, yeah, Peter Anderson. Yes, yes. Okay, wait, Leah Thomas. Hold on. I'm just gonna double check.
Which some of
Oops. Um, no, Leah Thomas is the swimmer. She's the swimmer. I'm pretty sure there was a trans MMA fighter, Fallon Fox, right? Okay, Fallon Fox is the trans MMA fighter. Um, and I think there's a trans bicyclist, but as you see, just the trans women usually get show up. But there's also a lot of trans people into bicycling. Um, yeah, so what I would do, and like it's great that you were asking the right questions. Um, and as long as you are approaching people, or at least, in my eyes, as long as you're approaching me with like um, compassion, empathy, curiosity, like genuine curiosity, and you actually want to learn, yeah, like I'm happy to like teach people anything. Like I may not have the stamina to like talk all the time about it or answer every question. So I can always like send um, resources through email. You can always email me. That way, like I can, if you have questions, specific questions, you can just put them in there, and then I can just pop in some resources for you right away. And I'm probably not going to be using StreamYard very much longer, and I'm not using it right now. I'm going through Streamlabs. So I'm going to type in my email right there for you. Yeah. And and we want people to learn. Like, how else are you gonna have empathy and understanding? You got to learn these things. Oh no, they're making issues out of another person. So it's just so annoying because like the studies are there. Restream works for you. Yeah, I've looked into that because StreamYard went up, like they doubled in price, and I'm paying already for Streamlabs. So, in Streamlabs, I can just run it straight through my OBS. I have better sound quality, better control over everything. StreamYard, it's very easy for people who don't know a lot of like tech things. I think it's you can pick up things pretty easily on there, but it does lower, I think, the quality of everything, especially sounds. But yeah. Iman Khalif, yeah. So she is a female. She is not trans, but of course, when you have a little too much testosterone naturally occurring in your body, people freak out. Or if you just have more of a masculine jaw, like people like to just pick out facial features on people and be like, nope, that means you're a man. Nope, that means you're a man. And again, they're demonizing the trans women. And in turn, it's now demonizing actual women and intersex people. Like, you haven't? Oh, okay. Yeah. And there's like a lot of really good trans activists out there that give good information. Um, At least to me, I feel like they give good information.
You may know about as well. Toxic literally means poisonous, and toxic masculinity is a cultural concept of manliness that glorifies stoicism, strength, virility, and dominance, and can be harmful to mental health and social well being. Orenstein explains that masculinity hasn't always been this rigid in Western culture. In the 19th century, she says, compassion and caretaking were more central to American and European masculinities. But when the Industrial Revolution moved paid labor from the home and farm to the factory, a
I
more
hear you, Carrie
dehumanized
Ann. Yeah.
ideal of manhood emerged. According to this ideal, a man should be physically strong, competitive, and virile. An expectation for early marriage and breadwinning attached itself to male factory workers, who were supposed to provide for their families and not complain about harsh working conditions. Recreation outside of work and family life focused on sports, many of which celebrated dominance, even violence. Orenstein found that many of her interview subjects struggled to respond when asked what they liked about being a boy. Those who did said sports, but some recounted how toxic masculinity had taken over
I
sports
loved
culture as well.
sports.
Bro culture, a subculture that has surfaced in male dominated spaces
Bro
like sports
culture.
teams and college fraternities, is often laden with misogyny and homophobia. Orenstein writes that even as sports teams, boys' schools, fraternity houses, Wall Street, Silicon Valley, Hollywood, and the military promote bonding, even as they preach honor, pride, and integrity, they tend to condition young men to treat anyone who's not on the team as the enemy. The only women who ordinarily make the cut are blood relatives, bros before hoes, justifying any hostility to them.
That is just so funny to
Loyalty
hear.
is paramount, and masculinity is habitually established through misogynist language and homophobia. The American sociologist Michael Kimmel has argued that homophobia is a central organizing principle of American masculinity. In 1994, Kimmel published an academic article called Masculinity as Homophobia, in which he writes, homophobia is more than the irrational fear of gay men, more than the fear that we might be perceived as gay. Homophobia is the fear that other men will unmask us, emasculate us, reveal to us and the world that we do not measure up, that we are not real men. We are afraid to let other men see that fear. Kimmel suggests there's a difference between the way women perceive masculinity and the way men perceive masculinity. From a woman's point of view, masculinity looks like power. Feminists have theorized masculinity as the drive for power and domination, and women have experienced male power in the aggregate, in the collective, as exploitative and violent. But on an individual level, many men fear collective male power as much as women do. The homophobia Kimmel locates at the heart of American masculinity is the individual man's fear of being perceived as feminine, which degrades his status in the context of patriarchy and subjects him to the exploitation and violence that's reserved for women in our culture. An intersectional analysis of masculinity reveals there's added oppression for men who are already marginalized due to race, ethnicity, class, sexuality, nationality, religion, age, and ability. Gay men are particularly vulnerable to the excesses and dangers of masculinity. As Peggy Orenstein writes, the gay guys I met were more conscious of the rules of manhood than their straight peers were. They had to be. And because of that, they were like spies in the house of hypermasculinity. Orenstein recounts the experience of Mateo, a 17-year-old high school student who is gay, Latino, and working class. When Mateo arrived at the private high school, he discovered that his classmates were almost all white, athletic, affluent, and as far as he could tell, straight. Orenstein writes, Mateo felt immediately conscious of how he held himself, of how he sat, and especially of the pitch of his voice. He tried lowering it, but that felt unnatural, so he withdrew from conversation altogether. He changed the way he walked as well to avoid being targeted as girly. One of my only friends there was gay too, he said, and he was a lot more outward about it. He just got destroyed. Orenstein doesn't elaborate on what Mateo means by destroyed, but it's clear that gay and trans men experience a dangerous level of gender policing whose consequences can be devastating, even deadly. Mateo's experience draws attention to the ways sexuality, race, and class can make men more vulnerable to the toxic effects of masculinity. If we consider masculinity through the framework of intersectionality, we notice there isn't just one masculinity, but multiple masculinities, where bisexuality, race, class, and other markers of social difference intersect with masculinity to heighten oppression for some men. The American writer Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote about his experience at the intersection of race, class, and gender in his memoir, Between the World and Me. The book was published in 2015, the year after Michael Brown was killed. Brown's murder and the acquittal of the officer responsible had an impact on Coates's 15-year-old son, Samori. Coates writes the book as an epistolary, a letter to Samori, in which he offers his reflections on what it means to be embodied as a Black man in 21st century America and how vulnerable his body and his son's body are. Coates identifies fear as central to maintaining the system of white supremacy in US society. He locates this fear in the vulnerability of Black bodies and characterizes the bravado or boldness that Black men often display as a response to this deep-seated fear. He writes, "When I was your age, the only people I knew were Black, and all of them were powerfully, adamantly, dangerously afraid. I had seen this fear all my young life, though I had not always recognized it as such. The fear was there in the extravagant boys of my neighborhood, in their large rings and medallions, their big puffy coats, and full-length fur-collared leathers, which was their armor against their world." Coates traces the music, the manner of walking, talking, and dressing, the street culture he grew up in, to the system that made Black bodies breakable, to Black men's fear that at any second they could lose their lives and no one would care or be held accountable. Black masculinity, he suggests, is a protective armor against white supremacy. While Coates describes Black masculinity as a response to white supremacy, he recognizes it as toxic and alienating. He tells his son, "I have no desire to make you tough or street, perhaps because any toughness I garnered came reluctantly. I think I was always somehow aware of the price. I think I somehow knew that that third of my brain that was spent performing masculinity should have been concerned with more
Yep, very
beautiful
true,
things.
Tampa.
I think I felt that something out there, some force, nameless and vast, had robbed me of what time, experience." Coates suggests that his efforts to conform to a narrow ideal of masculinity have robbed him of not just time, but a fuller experience of being human, barring him from so much of the world and the beauty it offers. The second text I've assigned in this module offers a slightly different perspective on masculinity. In the video, Male Inequality Explained by an Expert, writer and researcher Richard Reeves discusses the argument he makes in his 2022 book of Boys and Men: Why the Modern Male is Struggling, Why It Matters, and What to Do About It. According to Reeves, over the last 50 years, men and boys, especially those who are working class, are struggling to keep up with women and girls in education and the labor force, and it's taking a toll on men's health and relationships. In examining education, Reeves highlights how girls are now outperforming boys in US schools when it comes to proficiency in reading and math, as well as grade point averages. Additionally, in the US today, more women enroll in college and complete college than men, which wasn't the case in the mid 20th century, when men held the majority of college degrees. Reeves points to research that shows differences in brain development between girls and boys. While most adult women and men show no significant differences in brain function and performance, the same isn't true for children and adolescents. Girls' brains tend to develop earlier than boys' brains, which Reeves tells us gives girls an advantage in school. It's a great irony of women's progress that by taking the brakes off
But I
women's
also
educational
wonder,
opportunities and aspirations, we
I wonder how that plays into trans because I'd have to look at the studies again on what they've done with the MRIs in looking at trans brains. But I just feel like the whole girl boy thing in terms of brains may not even be like really a good indicator of anything because you also have intersex people, then you have trans people. What if like someone who's assigned male at birth has a girl brain and they present differently than what the stereotypes show? You know what I mean?
have
I
revealed
hope
the
that makes
fact that
sense.
the education system is slightly structured against boys and men because of these differences in the timing of brain development. But it took the women's movement to show that because the natural advantages of women in education were
I
impossible
get the
to
development
see
part
when
because I
women's
went through child
aspirations were
development
being capped by a
classes.
sexist society. Reeves's research also examines the intersections of socioeconomic class and gender and shows that while men and women in higher income groups have done increasingly well in US society, this isn't true for working class people, and especially working class men, whose earning power and status have decreased over the last 50 years. As working class men struggle in education and the job market, they also struggle in family relationships. Reeves says, until we escape the obsolete model of the breadwinner father, then we will continue to see more and more men being left out of family life. These men don't feel needed, Reeves suggests. But his goal isn't to go back to a time when men were needed because they dominated power and resources. Rather, it's to move forward by giving men a new purpose in this more egalitarian world. We
Yes,
have a
Carrie Ann,
cultural
yes.
responsibility as a society, men and women together, he says, to help men and boys to adjust to this new world. Because right now, many of them are really struggling. The third and final text I've assigned in this module explores the intersections of masculinity and trans identity. It's a documentary short called Imagine a Body, the second puberty of trans men. The filmmaker, Connor Lee O'Keefe, who's created several films exploring queer and trans identity, takes the viewer on a journey into trans masculinity. A trans man is a man who was assigned female at birth. Through the voices of several trans men, we learn that masculinity is more complicated than hormones and genitalia, body hair, and chiseled chests. O'Keefe presents gender transitioning as a nonlinear process and grounds us in the sensations his subjects experience, like the jab of a needle and the bristle of facial hair. One of the men featured in the documentary says, my particular experiences of being seen as a feminine girl, really not woman, and then a more masculine girl, and then a masculine man, and then now a more feminine man. I've really been in the world in very different ways. O'Keefe's film offers a more empowering vision of masculinity, one that's fluid and personal, as well as unpredictable. There is no script or medical procedure that makes someone a man. In the end, it comes down to a feeling, a sensation, a body. That's it for the second and final lecture in Module 4, Men and Masculinities. Thanks for your attention to the lectures in this module.
I think I said it on my last study stream when I was at the end when I was talking about non-binary stuff. The fact that literally nothing is binary. Like there's even intersex within like animal. Like, and I don't like when people talk about intersex people as like a mutation or an anomaly or something that isn't normal. It's normal. It's natural. Calling intersex people mutations or anomalies is just gross. Let me see. There we go.
Feeling like I'm in my own body, it feels, I mean, I guess that you have to first describe it as the absence, as where you feel like you're not in your own body for so long, that feeling like you are is such a new thing.
You know, I knew hair was gonna grow. I have no idea why we have ass hair. That just doesn't make any sense to me.
You should expect to be really hungry at all times.
The thing where like the clip grows, I don't know what to do about it. Like,
that's how it works. You don't get to pick what changes you get. You just get the ones that you get.
My personality changed a lot.
Once I started passing just by speaking, it completely changed my world.
So I hated my voice as a child. And I can't say I ever stopped hating my voice. Like I still do.
Trees are calming. So are bird sounds. So calming. I love nature.
I was thinking, okay, I'm going to get on T, then I'm going to have top surgery. By the time I have top surgery, my voice is going to be deeper and I'm going to start growing facial hair. By the time I'm 25, I'm going to be like a full man. I'm going to be just like a normal cis dude in the world and I'm just going to forget I was ever trans. Well, that's not really how it worked out.
It is possible for like your periods to come back a few years after you've been on testosterone. It can feel really hard in those moments to not feel angry or betrayed by your body. Like, why are you still doing this? Or like, why did you come back?
Honestly, I would say that the ability to grow facial hair was like the thing that really just floored me. I would try to imagine like hair, but not on your head. It was a very like foreign concept to me. Like I didn't know what that would feel like or look like, and I just couldn't imagine it actually happening.
Also, biological women that aren't trans, cis women, I mean, they uh they can have conditions that make them grow facial hair. That's how we got bearded women.
I always pictured physical balloons being tied to me, and I pictured myself cutting them and letting go of the entire social premise of gender being related to body parts. And it was a long process to get there, but the decision to just completely sever that was so quick.
There's this idea in sculpting where you take a chunk of wood and you carve away what's not supposed to be there to reveal what should have been there the whole time. It's a similar feeling. You start on this testosterone and suddenly it's like, oh, there's the person that was supposed to be there this whole time.
Ow,
There's the
ow.
person that I knew was there the whole time, but nobody believed me for so long.
Because I've always kind of wondered, like, what age is my body? Like, I've gone through a second puberty. Like, what does that mean for what my genes have in store for me?
My particular experiences of being seen as like a feminine girl, really not woman, and then a more masculine girl, and then a masculine man, and then now a more feminine man. I've really like been in the world in very different ways.
It's also okay to evolve and
Fundamentally,
want
I
to
don't feel
change.
connected to gender. I just feel like a being.
I don't like how a lot of society wants you to be super rigid and never change and stay one way. And so, I mean, that when you look at detransitioners, it's a very, very small, super small percentage of the percentage of trans people. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen, and that's fine. Like, some people really either just don't know until they go through a change if it's right for them, or you evolve into something else. Like, I've changed many times over my life. I could change again. Don't know. Who cares?
Think about doing some real.
That was pretty. Okay, so in case anybody wants to not go back and look at what reading that I have to do. It's this. Peggy Orenstein, The Miseducation of the American Boy. Don't know. I think you'll be able to find it. Hold on. Ah, what if I just do this? Yeah, okay, there it is. So it's the top one. There's another one. You can always just add PDF, and I bet a PDF would pop up. Looks like it's 11 pages. I'll have to read this later. And then what was the other thing? Richard Reeves, Male Inequality Explained. And it looks like this is a
number of people warned me against
a 15-minute long thing, which, because I'm in pain right now, I'm going to lay down. But if anybody wants to watch this, it's right there. Male Inequality Explained by an expert. I'll pop this link into the chat as well. Yes, I am taking this class right now. I did not, I'm in my 4th week, or I'm in my 4th week, and I did not do study streams on the first 2 weeks. But the first 2 weeks I did go over, I think, in my last study stream, Gender, Power, and Identity, which is these two right here, Kimberly Crenshaw, The Urgency of Intersectionality, and Angelica Ross explains the history of the word transgender. There's also this text here, Hearts Not on the Ground, and it's has a lot to do with Native people. And then we went over some intersex things. Emily Quinn, who's an intersex advocate, she's really good. I've watched a bunch of her TED Talks. And then what does two-spirit mean? And that's a Native term for anybody that is not male or female. Jenna Lin Fung, she did an essay with photos, what it means to be non-binary. And then I went over the stuff on abortion in this country right now, the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And I'm gonna have to start posting some of the optional texts that we have to read, or we don't have to, they're optional, but I've gone through some of them and they're really cool. So I will have to start posting some of those links as well in the comments after I do the study stream. Let me look at your comments real fast. I'm taking this class just as an elective, really, part of my early childhood education degree. And they didn't have one of the classes that I wanted to take, so this was the other one. And I figured, this would be kind of an easy A. I mean, I have learned some things. It makes me really think deeper about even my own identity as well. But I think I'm gonna get off of here and relax. I need to warm my heat thing back up to put it on my neck. Ow. So I hope everybody stays safe and hydrated, and I hope everybody has a good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. And I'll speak to you all soon. Love you. Bye bye.